The studio lights were warm in that familiar late-night way, casting a soft glow that made everything feel lighter than it really was. The band finished its upbeat sting, the audience applause swelled on cue, and Stephen Colbert leaned back in his chair with that practiced half grin, the one that promised humor but often hit a sharper edge. Denzel Washington sat opposite him, relaxed in posture, legs crossed, hands resting calmly on his knee. He looked comfortable, at ease, like a man who had spent decades in rooms far more intimidating than this one. The opening minutes had gone exactly as expected, jokes about age, stories from movie sets, laughter rolling easily across the studio. Colbert steered the conversation toward legacy, framing it lightly at first. He joked about awards shelves and iconic roles, teasing Denzel about whether he ever got tired of being called the greatest. The audience laughed, and Denzel smiled, deflecting with humility, crediting teachers, directors, and luck. But then Colbert leaned forward, voice shifting just slightly, asking whether Hollywood's obsession with representation had gone too far, whether it risked turning serious conversations into performative gestures. It was delivered with a smile, but the question lingered a beat longer than usual, heavy enough for the audience to sense it. Denzel straightened in his chair. His smile faded, not abruptly, but deliberately, like a door being closed without a sound. He answered calmly at first, speaking about history, about doors that had been closed long before cameras cared to notice who stood outside them. The audience murmured approval. Colbert nodded, then followed up, pressing the point, reframing it as a challenge. He mentioned critics, culture wars, the way everything becomes political, his tone still playful, but now probing. Something shifted in the room. The band stayed silent. The laughter dried up. Denzel's eyes sharpened, not with anger exactly, but with focus. He spoke about respect for stories that weren't trends, for struggles that weren't punchlines. He said that when pain is packaged for applause, it stops being truth and starts being entertainment. His voice never rose, but the firmness in it made the words land harder than shouting ever could. Colbert attempted to pivot, tossing in a self-deprecating joke, but it fell flat. The audience laughed out of habit more than amusement. Denzel paused, looking around the studio, at the faces in the crowd, the cameras, the glowing monitors. He took a breath, longer than expected, the kind of pause that feels like time stretching. When he spoke again, it was slower, measured, each word chosen carefully. "I don't come on shows to argue my existence," he said. "And I don't turn lived experience into a debate segment." The room was silent now. You could hear the faint hum of equipment, the rustle of someone shifting in their seat. Colbert's smile had vanished. He nodded, lips pressed together, as if searching for the right response and finding none that fit. Denzel thanked the audience for their time, his voice warm again but final. He rose from his chair, smoothing his jacket, and for a brief second it looked like Colbert might stand too, might try to stop him, to soften the moment. Instead, he remained seated, hands clasped on his desk, watching. The audience began to clap, tentative at first, then louder, applause swelling as people stood, unsure whether they were witnessing a protest, a statement, or something more personal. As Denzel walked past the desk, the cameras scrambled to keep up, producers whispering urgently through headsets. He gave a small nod to the band, a courteous acknowledgement, then continued toward the exit. The applause followed him, echoing against the walls. A strange mix of admiration and confusion. The studio lights still burned bright, but the atmosphere felt different now, heavier, charged with the kind of tension that lingers even after the moment has passed. Colbert cleared his throat, forcing a chuckle that didn't quite land, and thanked the audience as they slowly settled back into their seats. The show moved on, but everyone in the room knew something had broken the usual rhythm. It wasn't just another interview gone sideways, it felt like a line had been drawn, quietly but unmistakably, right there under the glare of late-night television. By the time the closing credits rolled, the moment had already escaped the studio. Phones were out before the applause had even faded, fingers typing, screens glowing with clips cut mid-sentence, reactions layered over reactions. In the control room, producers replayed the exchange in silence, watching the pause, the stand, the walk, each beat now magnified by hindsight. Someone muttered that it would dominate the morning cycle. Another said it would split the audience clean in two. No one argued. Backstage, Colbert sat alone for a moment, jacket still buttoned, tie loosened slightly. He stared at the blue card on his desk where the next joke had been written, a punchline now rendered useless. He exhaled, long and slow, and rubbed his hands together as if warming them. He wasn't angry. If anything, he looked unsettled, like a man replaying a conversation in his head, wondering where curiosity crossed into carelessness. When a producer knocked, he nodded without looking up and said, "Give me a minute." Across town, Denzel rode in silence, city lights streaking past the window. His phone buzzed once, then again, then continuously, but he didn't pick it up. He rested his chin on his hand and watched reflections slide over the glass. He wasn't triumphant. He wasn't regretful. He felt resolved. There are moments, he knew, when staying would have meant shrinking something important, and leaving was the only way to keep it intact. By morning, the narrative had already fractured. Some headlines framed it as a walkout, others as a clash, a few as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Commentators filled panels, parsing tone and intent, debating whether Colbert's question was fair or whether Denzel's response was too severe. Clips looped endlessly, slowed down, zoomed in on facial expressions, on the precise second the smile disappeared. Everyone had an opinion, and most of them were loud. Social media became a river of certainty. One side praised Denzel's composure, calling it dignity in motion, a reminder that boundaries don't need to be shouted to be firm. The other accused him of intolerance, of refusing dialogue, of walking away from a conversation that deserved to be had. In between were quieter voices, pointing out the pressure cooker of live television, the way nuance evaporates when a clock is ticking and an audience is waiting to laugh. That night, Colbert opened his show differently. No band sting, no jokes. He stood at his desk, hands resting on the wood, and addressed the moment head-on. He spoke about intention versus impact, about how curiosity can slip into provocation, especially when wrapped in humor. He admitted that he had pushed when he should have listened, that the desk was not a courtroom and guests were not there to defend their lives. The audience listened, some applauding, some silent, all attentive. "I respect Denzel Washington," Colbert said plainly. "And I respect his choice." It wasn't a full apology, but it wasn't a defense either. It was something rarer in late-night television, an acknowledgement of limits. Meanwhile, Denzel broke his silence in a different way. Not with a statement, not with a tweet, but with a quiet appearance at a community screening later that week. When asked about the incident, he smiled gently and said, "I don't mind tough questions. I mind careless ones." He spoke about conversation requiring trust, about laughter being powerful but not neutral. The room listened, not because he was famous, but because he sounded like someone who had weighed his words before offering them. As days passed, the heat cooled, replaced by reflection. Media professors dissected the clip in classrooms. Podcasters slowed it down to audio only, noting how tone changed meaning. Late-night hosts joked about it cautiously, aware that the moment had shifted something in their own rooms too. Bookers whispered about recalibrating questions, about reading the room more carefully, about the fine line between sharp and shallow. And then, gradually, the story became less about the exit and more about what it revealed. About how public conversations have become performances, how quickly sincerity is tested by spectacle. About how walking away, once seen as weakness, can sometimes be the clearest form of strength. Weeks later, when the noise had softened to a murmur, Colbert and Denzel crossed paths at a charity event. There were no cameras nearby, no audience waiting for a reaction. They shook hands, exchanged a few quiet words, and smiled, small, genuine smiles that never made it online. No one announced a reconciliation. None was needed. The clip still lives out there, frozen in pixels, ready to be rediscovered whenever someone needs an example of conflict. But for those who were there, or who watched closely, it became something else entirely. A reminder that not every moment is meant to be won, that sometimes the most powerful statement is knowing when to leave the stage, and that even in a world built for talking, silence can say exactly what needs to be said.